Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. We are in the company of Cynthia Cardoso of sister station Radio France International. New Zealand journalist Catherine Field is with us, as is Judah Grunstein of World Politics Review and Ziad Liman of Afrique Magazine. 2 weeks after the Paris attacks, the government's talking about counter-terror measures that start at school. The Prime Minister visiting a high school near the capital this Friday after earlier in the week warning of, quote, a territorial social ethnic apartheid in France's working-class suburbs. The word apartheid, enough to shatter a 14-day national unity moratorium on political mudslinging.
It disturbs me that someone can equate the French Republic, which guarantees free healthcare, free education, which has invested considerably in its country's deprived areas to improve the lives of people who live there, with apartheid. To compare the French Republic with apartheid is wrong.
Those in power today, along with those who were previously in power, need to be big, not small. We need to rise to the demands of French society and to refuse to participate in any polemic that aims to undermine the spirit of the 11th of January rather than advance real political debate.
11th of January, when there was that huge demonstration in Paris. Catherine Field, be big, not small, says the Prime Minister.
Yes. He's got a big job at the moment, actually, Manuel Valls, because one thing is we all know he's got his eye on the presidency. And he's trying, I think, to keep his own party in line because, let's face it, here in France, the Socialist Party have got a track record of speaking off message. So he's very busy, and I can only think that's the reason why he's starting to look a bit strained at the moment. So he's very busy keeping his party in line. He's very busy keeping his president in line. And at the same time, he's trying to bring everyone together in the spirit of unity, which doesn't seem to quite be working. And when he uses phrases such as apartheid, probably gets a few people wondering how bad is it.
Is that the right expression to use when you're talking about these working class suburbs that feel completely alienated?
Well, it's not the first time he's used this. I interviewed Manuel Valls back in 2005, and he used the same word, same expression, apartheid. The word apartheid means something very, very different, I think, to what he was talking about. It means what we all think it means, which is South Africa, which is some park benches for black people, some for white. I don't think the suburbs of Paris are anything like that yet. That having been said, there is a difference between your chances of employment and betterment if you are, say, second-generation immigrant.
All right, Ziad Liman, that's an important point, this reference to what happened 9 years ago and these riots in the working-class suburbs. And this conversation we've seen this week about how do you educate people? Do you put civics classes in schools? Why didn't that conversation happen 9 years ago?
Because it's an old conversation in France. It's not a new problem. It's an old problem, and every time there's something going wrong, we try to find out the miracle solution that might try to put these people back into the mainframe of the nation. But you use the expression working-class suburb. It's not working-class suburbs. It's not popular suburbs. It's suburbs outside of the city, beyond the peripheric. I mean, they don't have access to work. They don't go to work every morning. I mean, you cannot compare that to a typical American situation or a British situation with those, nicely neat little houses. I mean, it's not exactly working like that. When he uses the word apartheid, it's very probably excessive if you compare it, as you said, to South Africa.
And he's the former mayor of one of these suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, his whole, political career comes from this place. And the second thing, most of these, the guys we're talking about, they feel this franchise from the French society. That's why the word apartheid is interesting. And it hurts because, it creates a lot of reaction because people know inside themselves there is a problem there. And we should talk about it. And last thing, people forget that himself, Manuel Valls, is a first-generation French. His father and his mother are Spanish. He came as a Spanish boy in France. So in his mind, in his heart, he feels somewhat close to this kind of issues. And as you said, he used that word apartheid years ago in a book he wrote. And it's something common in his thinking. Alors, for the French bourgeois political circles, it's a scandal. How can you say that? But, people should go to these cities, as you say, working class
These
cities.
projects.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tough.
Cynthia Cardoso, this is the week where the French invented a new noun, le vivre ensemble, the living together, which I'm not sure is good French, but now it's what everybody's talking about. How do you live together and the living together?
Yeah, exactly. Now they want the living together to start in the earliest possible way in the school, primary school, and now we just heard the Minister of Education, Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, saying that they have this moral and civics plans to kids to try to make them feel French, actually, singing La Marseillaise, things that might seem somehow old-fashioned, but they think it might create this feeling of living together. We are all French, never mind if you are from foreign origin or not, but of course it's very difficult to force this feeling of living together. We are all French, because for many years we have the impression that the government overestimate the power of the République, thinking that because you're under the French laws or living in French country, automatically everybody would feel happy and being together and being French. And somehow now with the word apartheid, it shocks, because the kind of the French way of living shows that its limits. Of course, nobody feels French, and that's the tough task that they have to face now.
All right, the limits of the French model of assimilation. Judah Grunstein, you penned a piece for Politico this week where you focused on the 30-something generation.
Right. Well, it does sort of go back to that period, that 2005 period. So if you look at the generation that was 15 to 25 at that time, they're now 25 to 35. It's not the only reason why that generation would be more susceptible to the kind of dialogue of otherness. There are other reasons, obviously, but during this whole 10-year period, there's been this real focus in France on this question of French identity, what constitutes French identity, who belongs, who doesn't. And in the aftermath of the riots in 2005, there was initially a huge outpouring of concern. What can we do? And it really very rapidly turned into almost a cultural or a circling of the wagons. It coincided with a much more visible form of Islam that began to appear in France. And so there was this I feel like there's this mutual hostility, a mutual suspicion, a mutual mistrust that's grown up in the last 10 years. Previous to that, there was a social exclusion, there was an economic exclusion. People talked about the social fracture. I think in the last 10 years, there's something more that's been added on. It's something of an identity fracture, where a generation of French-born children and young adults are on one side not considered French, and on their side, in some ways, don't consider themselves French because of that exclusion. I think
and these, of course, are people born in France and French citizens.
Born in France, French language, French upbringing. Yeah. The thing is, the apartheid analogy, obviously, it's not a parallel because apartheid was a legal system. What you have in France is as a culture, it's a closed culture for an expatriate. I know for myself, it's not easy to sort of break in to France. But when you're born in France and you still have difficulty breaking in, I can only imagine the pain and the frustration that causes.
A couple of other stories we're following for you this week. At first, investigators called it a probable suicide, but Argentina's opposition didn't believe that crusading prosecutor Alberto Nisman would kill himself hours before he was to testify that President Kirchner obstructed his probe into a secret deal to normalize ties with Iran after the 1994 Buenos Aires Jewish Center bombing that killed 85. Well, now the Argentine president agrees. Cristina Kirchner Fernandez calling it a plot and a bid to discredit her. Cynthia Cardoso.
Wow, such a story. Yeah, exactly. Yesterday was a spinning around. She just because after the suicidal or the death, the tragic death of Nisman, she was kind of silent and saying that might be a suicide. But yesterday she changed her mind and said she had no proof, but she had no doubt that it was not a suicide. So, of course, it was in all the Argentinian press. Everybody asking what she meant. I mean, it's just...
And how's the press in neighboring Brazil?
In Brazil, everybody everybody knows that Argentina is always in a turmoil, so it's an economic or political problems, but this was something that really shocked in Brazil because he was handling a very delicate story against the Argentinian government, and he found dead like this. And the other question that raised, how the government could not protect him. How someone in such a high position, such a high level, did not have a bodyguard or someone to assure his security. So this is one of the questions that raised suspicion, of course, even if President Kirchner says that, of course, she's not involved in this story, but it would be very difficult for her to prove that she's not really, or the government, there is not a conspiracy against him.
All right, another Argentinian, again in the news, on his return from the Philippines, the Pope telling the story, whom he scolded for wanting to have an 8th baby by cesarean.
Some think that, excuse me for putting it like this, that in order to be good Catholics, we have to behave like rabbits. No. We need responsible reproduction. That is clear.
Catherine Field?
Well, I would have liked the Pope to talk about responsible reproduction a few hours before this, when he was giving a mass to 6 million people in the Philippines, a predominantly Catholic country, population of 100 million. Population has grown by 30% since the turn of the century. Poverty levels, more than 22% of families in the Philippines live below the poverty line. I think if ever there was a time for him to say, you know, you don't have to have a lot of kids, it would have been to the people of the Philippines during that mass, not on the plane on the way home to a bunch of journalists who have been traveling with him and are probably pretty tired.
Cynthia Cardoso?
Well, yes, exactly. And also, besides, some months ago, not long ago, he criticized couples that only want to have pets and not children. So, well, he's kind of course, he defends the Catholic vision that we have to have a family and have kids, but he tries to counterbalance it, saying that not like rabbits, but of course it would be a much more stronger message done in the Mass in the Philippines, of course.
If you look at the good side, sometimes it's interesting to look at the good side. I mean, we've been complaining for like, I don't know how many years about the wooden tongue of the popes, and that's nothing. I mean, this sort of very organized classical things about procreation, love, wedding. We have a guy who sometimes says something that makes lines moves. I mean, I don't even want to know how a classic Catholic might react to things like that. It's very disturbing to hear the Pope, the greatest authority, telling that you're not supposed to go like rabbits around. I mean, it's huge. It's amazing. And I think the guy was impressed in the Philippines. I think he was moved. I mean, the pictures were very telling. He was moved by this crowd, by all these kids coming to him, and all these abandoned kids, orphanage, and things. I mean, let's give him a little credit on that.
Every time we talk about the Pope, Judah Grunstein talking about the Pope, I always hesitate. But I will say, I agree. I think this Pope, what's great about this Pope is that he's almost more fun for non-Catholics than he is for Catholics. We get to really enjoy his papacy, probably maybe more than Catholics do. But he's got this really modern way of communicating that we're not used to,
and it's also
in that sense, it's very accessible. But it's also part of the modernity of it is that he has no filter, and that it just comes out. It causes this
filter is still there because he talks about responsible reproductivity, which is okay, but he doesn't.
He didn't specify what responsible.
Wait, how can you be responsible? I mean, besides
abstinence,
abstinence is it's a very religious concept.
No, it's not abstinence. It's the rhythm message.
Well,
and what do we call people who practice the rhythm method?
Parents.
Yeah,
he doesn't have a very. He doesn't
go into the red area of contraception
on the doctrinal aspect.
The red area, the no-go zones. To take to a word very fashionable these days. He doesn't talk about contraception. I mean, how can you talk about that without one day talking about contraception? How can you talk to to people in the third world, or the emerging world, without talking about contraception. I mean, one day or another, the church will have to talk about contraception. Maybe not this Pope, but this Pope at least is moving a little bit.
No, I think he has to, because don't forget, later this year he's going to come up with his encyclical about the environment and about the family. And this is a big year for the environment. Now, you can't just talk about the environment in terms of climate, in terms of other things. You have to talk about population.
Yeah, talk about demography.
Demographic. Yeah, we have got huge parts of the planet where it's just resources are just straining under overpopulation. So he's going to have to get his Jesuit brain around this a bit sooner.
So you take a country like the #1 Catholic country in the world, Brazil.
Yeah, where it's extremely popular, even if he's Argentina.
Right, even if he's Argentinian. In Brazil, if you're a Catholic, what's the calculation when it comes to this issue of population?
Well, in Brazil, I mean, even the population with Catholic who goes to church, they have contraception. They are not radical. They use modern contraceptions. And, of course, the debate in Brazil, I mean, the Catholics, of course, now it's 70% of the population, because there is also the evangelicals, as we say. Of course, they are rising, and they are on some points they are less conservative than Catholics. So of course, it influenced the religious agenda of the Catholic Church in Brazil. Of course, they're not going to say, so far, no bishop have said anything like that, like rabbits or contraception. It's still taboo in Brazil for, of course, the church. But it's let's say that Pope Francis is opening minds.
He's not only talking, I mean, it's interesting to listen on this issue, but on the political side, he's been trying to transform the Curia. I don't know how you say that in English.
The Curia.
Which is basically the heart of the power in the Vatican, and that was very...
There's a big synod being prepared.
I mean, this is very courageous on his... I mean, he's there for life. I mean, it's not a job that you can change or you cannot remove him, but still, he's taking on issues that have been plaguing the church for many years. It's very surprising. Maybe it's something about South America also. I mean, the South American church is probably more expressive.
Yeah, it's different, of course.
The liberation theory. I mean, all that stuff is probably in his mind. But let's accept this guy. I mean, he's different.
Catherine Field, you were pretty damning at the outset. We're pretty skeptical, shall I say, of the comments of the Pope on the plane returning from the Philippines. But, you know, we started our conversation tonight talking about Saudi Arabia, saying, well, it's hard to rock the boat fast. You can't move too fast when you're in a conservative institution. Mm-hmm. Is there a parallel to be drawn?
Well, I think there is. No,
audacious parallel.
That's a bit unfair. Well, I think when you look at the Curia and trying to reform the Curia, that was clearly... He hasn't reformed it yet. He's trying to move ahead. And the speech he gave, the Christmas time speech to the Curia, where he accused them of what was it?
No, that was tough. I mean,
that was tough stuff.
Saying it talks about
spiritual Alzheimer's
right.
was really very important. But I think he's got to say that because he's not daft. He knows there's huge areas of the Catholic Church in Australasia and South America where you have parishes that don't really listen to anything that comes from Rome, it comes from the Vatican at all. It's all very well to say he's going to fix it up there, but you have areas where the Vatican's a long way off. You've got priests who just say, yeah, well, it's really unfortunate you've had an abortion, but come back to Mass because we can't throw you out. And so he's got to get the church back to being relevant in people's lives, and the only way he can do it, I think, is by pronouncements like this and getting the top of the church back in line.
And our colleague was talking about the rise of evangelism. This is a terrible threat for the church because in Brazil it's clearly a threat. In Africa today, I mean, the voice of the church has been totally, outspoken by the voice of the thousands of evangelical churches that are here. We're trying to fill the void of spirituality, but also, these people are not clearly always religious, money issues, mafia issues, trafficking issues. That's why the church, it's also a need for the church to connect back, because they're living a void where all kind of people are entering and trying to manipulate or...
Yeah, exactly. In Brazil now we have over 300 different evangelical churches but all have in common that they really have the
and most of the team. Most of the football team is...
Yeah, most of the football team as well. And they really had to try
most
to...
Most of the national team, the Seleção?
Yes. And proud, I mean, proud.
And they pray before they play, and they're really interested because they try to connect with the lower, let's say, class, economical class of the population. They have a very different, they had from the Catholic Church approach. They talk about real-time problems, not only salvation of the soul, they talk about unemployment, about drugs, about domestic violence. And like this, they succeeded to conquer a lot of new and loyal faith people connected to this. And of course, but now with Pope Francis, he's aware of this. Argentina is the same case of Brazil and
a final point on this, and I'll put it to you, Judah Grunstein.
Of course, because why not? Sure.
And that is the coverage here in France of this, which has been sparing in a way.
Of this particular issue.
We really are a country of lapsed Catholics here.
Well, it's more than that. France is a very violently anti-clerical country, as the part of the Charlie Hebdo issue revealed. This particular issue wasn't really on the radar, but at the same time, he has sort of gotten under the skin here, and he's caused a discussion at the time he assumed the papacy and some of the things since then, because he does sort of challenge the stereotypical the stereotype that we have of a pope, of the Catholic doctrine. He has shown, maybe not the doctrine, but the approach to the doctrine. And I think the thing that's as a non-Catholic, the thing that's most compelling about him is that he really does talk about human connection and a human approach to faith. And he talks about not judging, about trying to meet people where they are, and things that can communicate to Catholics and non-Catholics alike, and that tend to assemble more than divide. So I think that in France, that part of the message definitely resonated, even if the rabbit quote didn't really make waves here.
Catherine Field, did Judah reconcile you there with the Pope?
Well, yeah. Listen, he's okay. He's better than some of the previous ones.
On doctrinal issues, I don't get the sense that he's moved tremendously, but in terms of the language that he uses...
I can't see any area where he's changed on doctrine.
Right.
But he's just made it much more...
The language is more inviting. It leaves the impression that there's room for everyone, and that you don't have to, that there's no conditions for walking through the door.
Once again, it's like, the audacious comparison you made earlier with Saudi Arabia. It's pretty difficult to change the dogma. It's pretty difficult to change the rules if you want to survive as an organization. I mean, how can you change the rules in the Christian church? It's going to be a very long process. I mean, we're talking about very complex issues, again, contraception, wedding of the priest, divorce, and all these questions are so much at the core that to change that in just a snap of the hand, it's just too difficult. I mean, that's why this guy is interesting, because he moves a little bit the frontiers.
I'll give you one area where
I don't know much about all that.
One area where he could really move is the case of the nuns in America, particularly New York, the ones who've been helping unwed mothers. When his predecessor, Pope Benedict, had really laid down the line to these nuns and said, you've got to stop this, you've got to throw them out of the church, you can't let them into the church, they might take communion, horror of horrors. And he hasn't rescinded that order on the nuns. He hasn't gone back to the authorities.
But it's an area where things could change. I want to thank you very much, Catherine Field. I want to thank Ziad Liman, Judah Grunstein, Cynthia Cardoso. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. All right, after that enlightened discussion on spiritual matters, let's say hello to Nicholas Rushworth.
Hi to you, Francois. Well, of course, from the Pope to Rupert Murdoch is just a small step, because...
A leap of faith, shall we say.
Well, we have two global powerhouses, don't we, with a huge influence worldwide. And Rupert Murdoch was making a lot of the buzz this week, not just the Pope. And, of course, from breeding like rabbits to the Sun's page 3 girl is also a bit of a leap of faith for some, but not at all a big leap. Let's go to the Times of London, which earlier this week...
Which is owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Absolutely. It's a Murdoch publication, News Corp, and there we can see that it announced the sun has got its top on. Page 3 covers up after 45 years. So a British saucy postcard tradition disappears. Why? Cue first question from me was, well, shouldn't the Sun be doing this? And of course, what we had was a lot of reaction, a lot of buzz online, and a lot of respectable broadsheets taking this story up. Let's have a look at the Atlantic here, saying, yes, page 3 is gone, insidious sexism, it's dreadful, anachronistic, archaic, it all had to go, didn't it? And of course, other papers around the world were the same. Of course, the Daily Telegraph had Matt, one of their cartoonists, there, which he's very popular in the UK there, saying, cheer up, love, the sexist objectifying of women is coming to an end. Of course, that wasn't to be at all. What we got midweek, the Sun says, oops, there we are. We've got the page 3 girl is back. This is Courtney from Plymouth back on Friday. And this beautiful pun, Francois, you're going to love this. Well, I hope you will. Here you are from the Sun. We've had a mammary lapse. So, of course, there we've got Laura here tweeting, saying, if I see any more men decide what feminism is or why page 3 should exist, I'm going to set fire to the internet. So a lot of anger there. Women feminists falling for no more page 3, more media equality. And there's been actually a response from the guys out there to the whole Sun's antics this week, saying, well, perhaps the men should put their chests online as well. The men are responding on Twitter saying the Sun's publicity stunt deserves a bare-chested man. Who else but Vladimir Putin?
All right. Nicholas Rushworth, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.